So right now our route is a fixed path to some resource. That resource could be users, or the resource could be foods or artists. It could be an HTML page, a piece of data in our database, an image, etc. We can also augment or support that URL path by providing parameters. And one of those is considered the query parameter. And this pattern should be familiar if you've looked on Amazon or eBay or Craigslist, anything like that. But it's essentially a key and a value that we can pass into our URLs. We can kind of chain it together. And this is a very simple demonstration here. So it'd be a question mark, and then Q would be the key in this example, and blah would be the value. And then if you want to chain multiple ones together, you would use a little ampersand, a little and. And so this one also would have foo as a key and bar as a value. So this is a way that we can pass information from our browser to the server in our URL. So the question mark tells the server that all text following the question mark should be interpreted and parsed as query parameters. So we'll take a look in just a second. So our request object, we saw earlier that it has a .params object. It also has a .query object so that we can pass these query parameters in there. Q would be the key in this example, and blah would be the value, foo would be the key, bar would be the value as well. Unlike arguments and functions or key value pairs in traditional JavaScript objects, query parameters are not comma separated. So we don't want to put our commas in the URL, but they're separated by that ampersand. So our second query parameter is foo and the value is bar. So if we were to console log our query parameter object, it would look like the screenshot right here. So it would have Q : blah, foo : bar, just like a traditional object. So I'm going to share my screen and walk through making our :name path that we created, that route that we created before lunch. I'm just going to walk through a few steps, and we'll see what these query parameters look like in action. So I'm going to share my screen. And let me know if I need to make anything larger, smaller, move it around, etc. But let's play around with this. Let me change this back to name, just so we're consistent. So we're playing around with food before lunch, right? So in this route, this :name route, remember that when there's a colon in our path, it's kind of a wild card. It's just going to match pretty much anything, any pattern matching that we put after that /. But I'm going to console log. I'm just going directly from what I pasted in Slack. Let me console log our params object so we can take a look at that. And then let's also console log our route property. And then we'll also console log our query object. And then I'm just going to copy this because I don't want to, in the interest of time. And then let's send back in our response, we'll just do some template strings here. So we'll render params.name, which is what we're passing into our path, and then query first name. So we're going to build a URL with a first name as a key, and then the value will be Mark. So I'm going to use this as my path right here. I'll put this into Slack. So I'm going to go to localhost 3000 /Schmitty. So since I don't have a specific Schmitty route, remember that it's going to pattern match with this wildcard. And then I'm going to do that question mark, which signifies a query parameter, with a key of first name, first_name, and that's going to equal Mark. So let me put that here, and we'll see what happens in the console and in the browser. So when I send that request to the server, it returns hello, my parameter, request.params.name. And then it also is going to pass in the value for my first name key, which is one of my query parameters. And that's right here. So it's going to be Mark. And then we can also check that out if you want to check out the server. Let's scroll down here to the bottom. So this is all the junk that we're console logging. The first thing that we console log is the params object. our request.params object. And that's right here. So we talked about params before lunch. So right now my param is going to be name colon Schmitty because that's what I put in. The next thing we console logged is request.route. So all of our requests also have a property called route. And it actually has a couple of features, but I just console logged the entire object. And so this is the route object. It has the path. So this is the path that we hit, right? This is the route that we created essentially, that colon name. And then here's some other stuff, like if we dig deeper, some stack information, and then the methods. So we used a get HTTP verb, a get method. Remember, because we were just like trying to get some information. And we have app.get, so we know that it was a get request. So that's the route. And then we also console logged request.query. And then this is the request.query, this last thing that we console logged. So again, this is going to be it's going to be a key in the value. Anything after that question mark, the Express knows that that's going to be a query parameter. And so this is our little query object right here. So just to demonstrate that this request has a bunch of different properties and methods attached to it, and we can take advantage, we can pass information back to our server in this way. And this is how we're going to get specific information for a given user, or if we're trying to do some sort of query. Again, if you go to like Craigslist or eBay or something, take a look at the URL as you search for things, and you can see how these URLs are built to pass this information back to the server. Cool. So let me put you guys into breakout rooms. We're a little tight on time, but I do want to give you guys, an opportunity to practice this a little bit. So I'm going to put you guys back into breakouts. You may not get through both of these, and that's okay. But given what we've gone through with routes and then query parameters, see if you can try this little exercise here. So I want you guys to try to write a route at /sightings that takes a query parameter of state and sites. So in this example, we're actually going to have two query parameters. And remember that we can add multiple query parameters with that ampersand. So write a route with those query parameters, and they should respond with an object that looks like so. So you should have a key of state, and then a value of the state of the union. The 50 states is what I'm referring to with state. And the value should be the state that you pass in, Alabama, Delaware, whatever. And then sites is the second key, second query parameter. And then that should be how many UFO sightings you think are in that state. So you're going to pass in a state and then probably some sort of integer. And then two, see if you can write a Bigfoot route that takes a query parameter of blurry. And this is going to be a little bit of an if-else conditional that you can put in your route. So when you send this across the wire, if blurry equals true, then I want you to log out that response to send it back, res.send. If blurry is false, I want you to res.send this second string back to the browser. So just a little hint, you're probably going to want to do some if-else conditional logic inside your route for number 2 there. So I'll put you guys in the breakout rooms. We'll get a little bit of practice with this. And again, if this isn't sinking in immediately, that's okay. We're going to be doing this throughout the rest of the course, but I just want to get you guys a little bit of exercise time. So any questions before I put you guys into breakouts? And you can continue to work on the app that we started this morning, that Hello Express app, to add these routes. Okay, cool. I'll check in on you guys. We'll take probably no longer than like 10 minutes so we can move forward. But just ping me if you need anything and open in the rooms. hit record. And for all the stuff we're going to do the rest of the afternoon and for lab time, we're still going to use this Hello Express app. So you can keep that open and kind of at the ready. Let's talk about views in Express. So the first question, what is server-side rendering? What does that mean? Well, here's a little metaphor I came up with. Server-side rendering is like a traditional restaurant like Chili's. Any Chili's fans? TGI Fridays? Applebee's? Alan, I think you're an Applebee's man. You strike me as an Applebee's man. But so let's just think of
Fridays.
You like TGI Fridays? Okay, fair enough. So let's think about Chili's. So the way that it works in a traditional restaurant, you go to the restaurant, you sit down at the table, and you place an order or a request in dev terms. And the waiter or waitress, the server, I'm using waiter explicitly so we don't get that confused with the word server. But the waiter delivers it back to the kitchen for assembly, right? So let me take your order. I'm going to take it back to the kitchen so we can cook something up for you. Back in the kitchen, all the ingredients or the data are combined and placed into an oven. And in the context of what we're doing today, that oven is kind of our Node Express Handlebars environment. Handlebars is the view engine that we're going to use. But the idea is that you grab all that data, you grab all of the ingredients that you want to send back to the browser, and you put that into an oven to kind of bake together and render that view. But you do all that back in the kitchen. You don't see that happening, right? Because you're sitting at the table, probably having a nice cocktail or some hors d'oeuvres if you're inclined. Then finally, when the dish is ready, that fully baked dish or the HTML is then delivered back to your table by the waiter or the response object. So we looked at the requests and the responses. But long story short, too long didn't read. Server-side rendering means you don't see any of that stuff going on. It's all happening back in the kitchen, or it's all happening back on the server. Now, client-side rendering is what we're going to get into in the next unit. That's AngularJS, for example. Client-side rendering is like going to a hibachi restaurant. So have you guys been to one of those restaurants where they set stuff in fire in front of you? That's client-side rendering. That's what we're going to do next in unit 3. But in that example, all of the ingredients or the data are delivered to your table initially or to the browser. So it's all ready to go. It's at your disposal. So you know how you go to a hibachi restaurant and they just wheel out a cart with all the ingredients that they're going to make any of the dishes out of. That's the same thing with client-side rendering. With client-side rendering, we go ahead and grab all of the pertinent data that we need, and our browser has access to it. And then whatever view we click on, whatever we need done, all of that data is there at our disposal in the browser, the client side, and we can usually see that data. Each dish or the web page view, if you will, is assembled by the chef, by AngularJS, if you will, in real time as requested. So again, server-side rendering is everything happening in the server. We don't see that operation. We don't see that stuff getting baked together. In client-side rendering, which we'll do in the next unit, we can see that. All of that happens in the browser or in the client. So hopefully that's helpful. But when we talk about server-side and client-side rendering, that's kind of the delineation that we're referring to. Any questions about that? Cool. So we're going to use, there's many template engines that we can use, many view engines. We're going to use something called Handlebars. And there's a couple of reasons that we're going to use Handlebars over some alternatives, and I'll tell you why. Let me put in this nice little screenshot. Handlebars. Handlebar mustaches. Mustaches. And here's a link to their documentation if you want to check it out. You guys will probably be checking that out throughout the day. So what does Handlebars do for us? So the food that Alan is eating would be considered, would that be client or server side? Alan, you want to let us know?
Client side, right?
I guess so. I actually don't know the answer to that. because you probably assembled it somewhere, but then you're eating it and we can see it. Yeah, I guess you could consider that client side.
I'm the server and the client.
That's true. Once we'll consider that a mobile friendly experience. I don't know. Okay, handlebars. So handlebars allows us to embed JavaScript variables inside of our HTML documents and render it as text. Our server injects the variables into the HTML document before sending it to the client. So similar to our restaurant example, Express and Node is going to bake together. It's going to grab whatever data we need from the database. It's going to grab the HTML document. It's going to bake all that together and then send it back to the browser, to our client, via the response object. The client/browser will never see the variables or the handlebars syntax. It'll only see the values for those variables. The HTML document is fully baked when the browser receives it. And we'll see what that looks like. We're going to inspect element, and we'll go down into the DevTools to check that out. Now, one way to think about this, a very similar concept, is our string templates. So string templates is a way to print out a given variable by passing in that variable name into the string, right? We were doing that this morning with request.query.whatever or request.params. So it's a similar concept. But instead of using that $, curly bracket syntax inside of our string template, or the way we would in a string template, we're going to use a slightly different syntax. But essentially, this is just kind of a quick and dirty review. When we talk about string templates, we're talking about something like this. If my cutting and pasting will let me paste, and I'll just do it directly. So this is what we were doing this morning. So if I had a variable name and assigned to the string of mark to that, and I wanted to console log that variable, I could pass it in like so, right? So string templates, we use those backticks. And then instead of putting in the string mark, I can make it a little bit more dynamic. And I can pass in the variable of name in between the $, and the curlies. So this is kind of what we're doing when we talk about handlebars and when we talk about these templating engines that we have at our disposal. So handlebars gives us a very similar functionality to the string templates, but instead of injecting the variable name, it's going to inject the actual data, or mark in this example, into our HTML. Just to let you guys know, there's a lot of other templating engines out there. There's one called Pug, which is really nice. Some of you guys may want to investigate that. There's another one called Embedded JavaScript. The reason that we aren't using those and we're using handlebars specifically, there's a couple of reasons. One reason is that handlebars is really fun. The documentation is relatively accessible. It's pretty good documentation, which is always a plus. And also the handlebars syntax closely resembles Angular syntax. So in Angular, we're going to be doing pretty much this exact same thing, but it's going to look a little different. But as far as apples to apples goes, using handlebars looks very similar to Angular. So hopefully that'll help you guys make the connection a little easier when we get to Unit 3. So that's why we're using handlebars. Okay, so let's set up our app to use handlebars. We're gonna need to do another npm install. So there's 4 steps here. I'd ask you guys just to hang tight for a few minutes. Let me walk through it, and then we'll help you guys get through it. If you're having any anything to debug or having any issues, we'll get you through it. So these are the 4 steps we're going to use to incorporate handlebars here. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll walk through it. Again, we're going to use the Hello Express app that we started this morning. So we're just going to be adding on to it. I still have NodeMon running right here, which is fine. So again, if you want to have another tab open, one tab with your server running, and then another tab where you can type in these commands, that's kind of my preference. It's a little bit of a smoother workflow. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is npm install handlebars. And I'm also going to put a -- save flag in this command. So if someone wants to come on mic while I'm typing this, what does that -- save do for us? Why might we want to use that command when we're npm installing something? So what doesn't
it it's like telling it a command and you're telling it this command that I'm going to do is saving it? Yes.
Well, close. So all the --save does is it goes ahead and adds that npm module to our dependencies object in our package.json. So remember that we could have typed this in manually. I could have just typed in HBS manually and the version number. But when you do that --save, npm is very polite, and it'll just go ahead and slap that in there. And that's all that it does. If we didn't put --save, our dependencies would look like this. And then I would need to go in and manually type in that dependency. So it's just a nice little shortcut. I use --save pretty much all the time because I don't want to screw it up. So I'll just let npm not only download Handlebars and install it in my node modules folder, but I'll also let it go ahead and add the whatever version it's downloading. I'll go ahead and let it add that to this dependencies object. So that's what --save does. And keep that in mind because occasionally you'll probably forget to use --save and you'll try to install something and then it won't work, or you won't be able to have access to it or something. And that's a really common culprit. It's like, oh, I didn't add it to my package.json. So that's a pretty common kind of mistake. But if you use --save, you don't have to worry about that. Cool. So earlier today, if we wanted to use Express, we had to require the Express module, right? So we're going to do the same thing for Handlebars. So up here, I'm going to create a variable, and I'm going to call this HBS. And this HBS needs to be really specific because I think there's like two very similar node package manager modules. One's Handlebars, and then one's HBS, and then one is something slightly different. So we want to make sure that we're using HBS. It's very specific. If you type in Handlebars, that's some other module. So you just want to make sure that we get the right one. So I'm going to assign this to a variable HBS, and I'm going to require it. Oops. So we've got that right there. So I'm requiring HBS. Again, I could make this whatever variable name I wanted, but kind of the best practice is, just name the variable what you're requiring. It just keeps things nice and tidy. Cool, so that's step 2. And remember that require, just to recap, require actually brings in that module. Right now I have that module in my node modules folder, but if I want to do something with it or actually incorporate it into my app, I need to do this require. And if you want to check the documentation for require, it comes from another library called common.js, but it's a really powerful feature that Express takes advantage of. So we need to make sure to require it. Okay, 2 more steps. So the next thing I want to do, now that I have HBS Handlebars at my disposal, I need to tell Express specifically to use this view engine. And the way that I do that is I'm going to use an app.set. So .set is another method that Express gives us, very similar to a .get or a .post or what have you. And .set is a way that we can configure Express. We use it when we're trying to configure our application. So for this one, what I'm trying to set is the view engine, Express's view engine. And then the second argument this takes is I just want to tell it exactly which view engine I want to use. So I could use, like I mentioned earlier, we could use something called embedded JavaScript if we wanted. We could use another templating engine called Pug if we wanted. There's a lot of them out there, but we're going to use Handlebars or HBS. So app.set, we'll be using app.set a lot. I think we're going to use it later this afternoon, for example. But this is a pretty common way to add some configuration to our application, to our Express app. Okay, cool. Oh, one more important thing. It's here in the lesson, just to let you guys know. So we're going to be adding views this afternoon that are going to turn into HTML documents for our browser. With some engines, you need to tell Express where to look for those files, where to look for those views that we're going to create. Luckily for us, Handlebars is a little more user-friendly than most. And so Handlebars knows to look inside of a folder called Views. And so that's going to lead us to our next and final step. So number 4, we need to create a new folder called Views, and that's where we're going to put all of these view files into. So number 4 here, I'm going to go ahead and make dir. So let me clean this up. Make a views directory, and you can see that that was created right here in my app. You guys can see that. And then in here, we're just going to start with 2 view templates. So I'm going to touch a views greeting. Then the extension for Handlebars is HBS, just FYI. And I'm also going to create a views layouts, and we'll talk about what those do. I'm going to create those 2 views to start, and here's my greeting and my layout files. So what we're going to do after you guys set this up, the convention is we're going to play around to start with our greeting route right here that you guys should already have this from this morning. We're going to play around with that one first. But the convention generally is when you have a route, you want to name the view, generally speaking, the same, name it the same thing as the route, right? It doesn't have to be, but again, this stuff gets as confusing, it gets confusing on its own. So we kind of want to use convention and best practices, and that's one of the best practices. If I have a route, a simple route / greeting, let me name the view for that / greeting, just so it keeps it straight. Let me stop my screen share, and then we'll put a pin in it and let you guys go through those 4 steps. Any questions about any of those 4 steps? Anything that I walked through? Again, this is one of those kind of configuration things that you guys will be doing a lot of this configuration. If you want to use a view engine, you're going to need to set it up in this way, with any app that you build. So this will be pretty standard. Okay, cool. So go ahead and follow those 4 steps and incorporate Handlebars into your application, and then we'll move forward actually adding some content to these views. And if you wouldn't mind, just give me a thumbs up in Slack when you finish those 4 steps. And let me know if you have any issues. Hit record again. So everything we've done so far has been in order to configure Handlebars with our app. And just to recap, you'll need to go through those steps every time you need to make a new Express application if you want to use Handlebars specifically. So number 1, I've got 4 steps here. So again, if you wouldn't mind, just watch me, and then we'll put a pin in it, let you guys follow along. So remember how we used query parameters earlier in the routing lesson, Intro to Express? Well, just for an example, we can use those just as before, but rather than sending them with a res.send, we can pass them to our view and render it as HTML. So I'm going to adjust my greeting route like you see here in that screenshot. So let me share my screen and I will walk through this. And let me know if you have any questions as I walk through it. So you guys are going to be adjusting your greeting route. So we're still going to go do an app.get. So get's going to be our HTTP verb to / greeting. But let's make a little bit of a change in here. The first thing I'm going to do, just for sanity's sake, is I'm going to console log my request query object, just so I can check it out in my server logs, just in case there's any errors or anything. But now instead of a res.send, we're going to use res.render. So .render is the method that we're going to attach to our response object when we want to render an actual view file. So instead of res.send, we're going to use res.render. And render takes 2 arguments. The first thing it takes is the name of the view file we want it to render. So as I mentioned earlier, kind of the convention, so it helps to avoid confusion. Since I'm hitting the greeting route, I'm going to name this view greeting.hbs. Now you could put HBS at the end of this if you wanted, but Handlebars doesn't require it, so I'm leaving that off. But I'm asking Express to render the greeting view. And remember that luckily, Handlebars knows to look in a folder called Views. And so that's where we're going to put all of our views. And that's why we created that folder earlier. So all of our views are going to go into the views folder. So that's the first argument we pass in. The second thing we can pass in, and this is optional, but if we want to pass any data, if we want to pass any ingredients that we want to bake into this file, we can do it right here. So we haven't set up a database yet. That'll be a little bit more complex. But let's just set up a simple data object here with a key of data, and then the value I'm going to make our request query dot saying parameter. So my route's going to be /greeting, put a semicolon at the end of that. And then we talked about query parameters. So I'm going to pass in a query with a key of saying, and then I'm going to make that equal something. So instead of sending a string directly back via the response to that GET request, I'm going to actually render a view. I think I just mentioned this. So .render is the method that we're going to use. First argument is the name of the file. Second argument, which is optional, is the actual data that you want to send back. Okay, so that's step one. Let me paste in step 2 here. So step 2, when I go to this URL, localhost port 3000 /greeting saying equals hi, our view is empty. Well, let's go ahead and change that now. So just let me show you what happens. We haven't added any information to that view yet, but I'm going to go ahead and try to hit this route, and we'll see what happens. It actually should just be blank. So I'm going to paste that in. Again, I'm going to /greeting saying equals hi. And when I go here, it's just empty. But that's a good thing. So it actually is loading that template, that greeting.hbs view, but it's just empty right now. It's a blank page. So let's go ahead and let's fix that. You guys can copy this if you want, this HTML. Just hold off on doing it so get through these extra steps, but I'll paste this in. So we created 2 files, right? We created a layout file and a greeting file. This code is going to go into our layout file. So the cool thing about layouts and templating engines, layouts refer to any information that you want to appear on every page. So examples of that would be maybe the header information, if we have the title of the page, if there's particular external JavaScripts or CSS files. Maybe if we have a nav bar, we want a nav bar to appear on every page, right? Or a footer, we'd want to appear on every page. So any information like that, we can put into a file called layout.hbs. And it's kind of like a picture frame, if you will. So that picture frame is going to be consistent. But what we're going to do is for any given route, we're going to change what goes inside that picture frame. And if you look at the code that I just pasted into Slack, if this code is considered a picture frame, where are we going to insert all of the specific information for any given route that we have? Where is that going to go in our layout? Body, yeah, exactly. So this code is going to remain the same. It's like a view, but every time we hit a new route, if we have a view for it, it's going to be rendered in that body tag. And so notice the handlebar syntax, right? It's curly braces. And so the body requires 3 curly braces. Not everything that we insert requires 3, but the body does. It just has something to do with, so handlebars doesn't get confused with this body versus like if you have a body tag in your HTML, sometimes it can get confused. Any event, so I'm gonna paste this garbage in here, and feel free to just paste this if you want to in the interest of time. But again, this is my frame. So I wanna have the head section, the body section. I'm gonna, this is a really janky placeholder for a nav bar and a footer, but you'll get the idea. So let me save that, and just let me refresh, and let's see what happens here. So if I just refresh, at least I'm getting something, right? This still looks like garbage, by the way. For lab time, you guys can actually make this look nice and pretty. But right now, this is our layout. We still haven't put any code into our greeting.hbs. However, every template that we create is going to go inside this layout, right here in the middle. So let's flesh this out. So that's step number 2. For step number 3, I'm just going to put 2 little lines of HTML. I'll put steps 3 and 4 in here. So let me go to views greeting.hps, and I'm just going to do an H1. I'll put this is our greeting route response. And then down here, I'm going to use handlebars. I'm going to pass in the data variable. So handlebars actually, like I said, on this layout page, we used 3 curlies because that's the body. And that's very specific for the body itself, just because if you go through their documentation, sometimes depending on the browser, it could get this body confused with this body. But that being said, the rest of the time, kind of the standard way to insert variables into these templates is just with 2 curly brackets on each side. So what I'm going to insert here is my data variable. So I'm going to open up a new tab right here. And that data variable is going to consist of what? So check out our greeting route and put it into Slack. What is actually going to be inserted right here where I have the variable name data? What's going to be inserted right here? Take a look at our route. So look at our object here. So what's going to be inserted here? Anyone?
It's going to call up same, which according to that URL, it would be hi.
Yeah, exactly. So this is kind of our data object, right, with keys and values. So essentially, this is the same thing as dumping whatever request query.saying is. That's kind of what's happening here. So this data variable inside the handlebars is going to be the value for whatever data is right here. If I created another key value, let me clean this up a little bit so it's a little more readable. Maybe if I had something like name equals Mark, and let's say that I wanted to add that string of Mark in here, that's how I would do it. So since I'm hitting the greeting route and accessing, rendering the greeting view, this is all of the data that that template has available, has access to, data and name, just for example. Let me get rid of that so we're consistent with the lesson. Cool, so now we have our layout and our greeting. Let's go back here and let me hit refresh. And there we go. Wow, that is really nasty. But here is our greeting layout. So it's rendering, this is our greeting route response, which we're getting from right here. And then instead of rendering the data variable, it's rendering the value for that variable right here of hi. And then the last thing I'll have you note, if you go down to the dev tools, remember that all of this happens in the kitchen on the server side. So if I inspect the element here, if I inspect hi, notice that the browser literally sees this as a p tag HII exclamation point. The browser doesn't know anything about handlebars. It doesn't know if this is handlebars or Angular or, well, it wouldn't know if it was Angular because Angular lives in the browser. But the point being, all of this stuff gets baked into the server. And so what gets sent to your browser is the fully baked HTML document. And so that's why here in the browser, this thing doesn't know anything about handlebars or if it's using, it doesn't know what templating engine it's using. All it knows is that it's getting a string of hi within some p tags. So yeah, that's a templating engine. That's how it works, handlebars specifically. So let me stop my screen share and I'll have you guys walk through those 4 steps. So again, you want to create those, well, we just created those files. But go ahead and play with the greeting route, add that code to your layout.hbs and add the code to your greeting.hbs, and then see if you can render that view in the browser. And it should look something like this. I'll paste this into Slack. And if you want to play around with how this looks, please feel free. This looks really janky, but so give me a thumbs up. When you see this in the browser. And consider that right now we're just like, we created like a data key with like a janky value of, request.params.query or query.saying rather. But consider this is how we're going to get information from our database, which is going to be much more robust, much larger pieces of data. We're going to hit the database and plug that into our views, and that's how we're going to get the data back to the browser. So this is a very kind of stripped down method of how we're going to do that. Kieran has a test npm. You should not have a test npm folder. I don't know what that would be. But if, and then I want to talk about loops, and then we'll be at lab time. So I think we're in pretty good shape. I'm going to share my screen again just to walk you guys through another example. So what if we had an array of our favorite foods in our server.js file and we wanted to render them into a view? So let's take a look at this, a little bit more of a complex example. And eventually this is leading up to actually adding a full-on database to our app, but we'll get to that next week. So step one, I'm going to create a file called foods.hbs. I'll put this in my views folder, like so. And so remember that Handlebars is pretty smart, and it knows it's going to look for any of our views in a folder called views. You can change that if you want. You can add some configuration, but out of the box, it's going to look for a views folder. Cool. Number two, just want to experiment with a little bit more complex data here. So I'm going to create a new route for favorite foods, let's say. And I'm going to add an array of faves. So let me go into my server.js, and I'm going to create another. Actually, in the interest of time, I'm just going to copy this route and I'll paste it in here. So this is an app.get, it's another GET request. This route is going to be to /favorite-foods. And then in my callback function, I just added a collection of favorite foods. It's pretty random. So these are some of my favorite foods. You can change these if you want. And then here in the res.render, this time I'm going to render the foods template. Now I know I'm breaking with convention here. I did say that the template should be named, to keep things kind of from getting confusing. So I'm going to change this to favorite foods. So generally your route, you want it to be the same thing as your as the name of your template. So just so we avoid confusion, so let me change this to favorite foods. Okay, cool. Now, let me ask you guys this. So I want to render this template and I want to feed it some data with my handlebars. What should the value be to my data key right here in this data object? So I want to render all of these foods to my view. So what do I need to put right here? What is data going to equal here?
The variable favorite foods.
Nice, yeah. Yes, in this example, I just want to feed this to my view. So I'm going to make data : favorite foods. Nice. And then finally, I'm going to play around with this favorite foods view. And so I'm just going to put some HTML in here. These are my faves. And then what code am I going to put in here if I want to put that data into like a p tag? Pretty janky. What would that look like? You can put it into Slack. if I wanted to use Handlebars to insert those favorite foods, what code am I going to put right here on line 2? It's in the screenshot already, but just humor me. Yeah, nice. So I'm just going to put some p tags and call that data. And let me go back here. I'm going to refresh my browser. And so now I have a new route at my disposal. So let me get rid of this greeting saying hi stuff. And let me go to favorite foods. And there we go. Oh, I misspelled it. Not tie, but ITE. And so there we go. So I'm still getting the behavior of that layout, right? So I have my, placeholder for a nav bar, my placeholder for a footer. And then now I'm getting, since I go to favorite dash foods, I'm telling Express to load the Handlebars template, favorite foods, favorite dash foods. And so it's loading this template here, and it's substituting this variable of data with whatever I told it to stick in there. And in this case, I'm asking it to insert my favorite foods array into this template. And so I can see the Reese's peanut butter cups, blah, blah, blah. And then again, and this for the sake of redundancy, if I go down and inspect the element, I don't see any handlebars. Again, the browser has no idea what's going on behind the scenes because all of this is happening on the server. The server adds the data into the template, bakes it into an HTML page, and then sends that fully baked HTML page to the browser. So all the browser sees is this string of Reese's peanut butter cups, taco soup, etc. Has no idea what handlebars are, and it doesn't really care, actually. All it's going to do is render that fully baked HTML page. Cool. So that's just another example. We're getting to where we'll insert a database for sure, but just adding some more data right here. Let me see. Yeah, why don't we take a few minutes? Go ahead and add that to your app, and then we're going to take a look at Handlebars loops. So I just sent this array to my view, but it just is a crazy string. What if I want to put it on different lines, or if I want to make a list elements from it? And we'll take a look at that next. So let me stop my screen share, and then go ahead and walk through those few steps if you want to add a route of favorite foods. And then we'll move forward. And I'll paste in those steps again right now. So there we go. Yeah, and go ahead and give me a thumbs up when you're able to render that favorite foods template, that view in your browser. And actually, let me go ahead and give you kind of the next where we're headed with this. So when you get that working, when you're able to get your favorite foods rendering on the page, I'm going to ask you guys, go ahead and go to the Handlebars documentation. And I want you to see if you can figure out how you can create a loop from that array of foods. And see if you can make it render in the browser the way that you see in that screenshot. So it's something like my favorite foods, and then see if you can create list items from each food. So you can create like an unordered list that lists those foods.
So, this is my foods.hbs file. And so I have my unordered list tags here, and then it's in each loop, which then uses our data. And each time it does a list item, it uses this to iterate through the object. And then this closes that loop.
Yeah. So that's awesome, Alan. So Handlebars has a lot of nice helper methods and ways to iterate or loop over objects and collections. And so this is how you could use a simple each loop over some data. And this is directly from the documentation. For those of you that went through the documentation, did you find that, was it pretty accessible? Was it not too bad?
Look at it. I didn't look at it. I was trying to just like for loop because I don't like jQuery. So I just prefer a regular for loop because I can see the values that I'm, I don't know why. I need to get over it. And I was trying to loop, I was trying to loop it in the wrong file. I was looking through it on my server.js. And it was missing everything.
That's a really good point. Yeah, you could use jQuery if you wanted, but remember that jQuery is going to be client side. It's going to be in the browser. So you could send that array of information to the browser and then write some JavaScript that would loop over it and render it to the page.
It makes sense. Yeah, like once Cody told me how, like where to do it. Now it makes more sense.
Yeah. Again, jQuery is totally valid if you want to use that. One of the great advantages of using a templating engine is that you don't have to. So if you wanted to use play in their sandbox, they have a lot of really nice helper methods for that. The last thing I want to show you guys, and then I'll put you guys into lab time to get some more practice. I just want to show you if you want to incorporate external CSS files or your own JavaScript files. Let me quickly show you how you can configure your Express app to do so. Let me share my screen. And I'm just going to add a really janky CSS file just for demonstration purposes. And I'll plug these steps into Slack. So like Alejandro was saying, if you wanted to add maybe your own JavaScript file with some custom jQuery methods and such, you would need to tell Express to load up that JavaScript file so that the browser would have access to it. So this is how you can add external kind of static assets to Express. So to do this, we're going to go back to the server.js file. And this time, I'm going to use a method called use. Now, this .use method is called something, it's called middleware. That's what it's referred to. We'll talk more about middleware as we go through the coverage, but middleware is just a fancy word for things that you can do in between the request and the response objects. So Express receives that request from the browser, and you can do a lot of stuff in between that request and before Express sends back a response. Certain things that may fall into this category, maybe if you want to do some robust logging to the server, if you want to do some authentication or something, maybe if you're doing some really complex server-side, database calls, or maybe if you're even trying to hit like an external database, maybe if you're using Firebase or something, maybe you want to use this middleware component to do so. Again, middleware is just a fancy word for doing something in between the request and the response. We're going to talk more about this later in the week because we're going to add some forms to our views so that we can submit form data. And like Colin mentioned yesterday, form data or information between servers and browsers is usually just crazy strings, right? So we're going to need some way for Express to take all of that form data and make sense of it, and know that you're trying to create like a first name and a last name and an address or a phone number or an email or whatever. So we'll take a look at that later in the week. Anywho, it's a long story short for what .use is. But specifically, kind of the quickest way to add external files, I'm doing express.static. So static is a method that Express has available to it for static assets. Static assets are things like CSS files, JavaScript files, fonts, images, anything like that. So the argument that static takes is dir name or directory name, and then you want to pass in the directory where you want to put this stuff. So we're going to create another folder called public, and that's kind of a convention. Any kind of third-party information, third-party scripts or CSS files, again, fonts, images, anything like that, generally you'd want to put inside a separate folder called public. And I put it here in the README. I just want to really point this out. Make sure that you put this / before public. That's really essential because Express is going to build a path from this static dir name plus public. If you don't put that / there, your stuff isn't going to work. So that's really important. I know that typos happen, and that's a really important one to make sure you have that in there. Cool. So that's the path. Let me go into the terminal. I'm going to make a public directory. And then inside this public directory, it's good practice. This is a pretty simple path. But let's say that I'm going to have multiple CSS files or multiple JavaScript files or whatever. I probably want to create another folder just for my CSS. So let me make another directory inside my public just for CSS files. And if you go to Atom, if you guys can see this, so now I have a public directory and I have a CS folder or directory inside that. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a very simple styles.css file for some really fancy CSS. So let's touch public CSS, and I'll call this styles.css. Now, if you look at your layout.hbs, I already gave you this path. So you guys should already have this / CSS / styles. So you don't need to add this to the layout. It's already there for you. But if you wanted to add JavaScript or images or whatever, you would want to put a link in the head of your document, and you'd want it to look like this. So Express already knows to look in the public directory, right? So when we're telling the file where to look, we don't need to put this / public. We can start at everything after that. And so that's why here in the head, I start this href with / CSS, because Express already knows, all right, I'm already in the public folder, now tell me where to go. So that's how this works. Again, if you put public in here, that's not gonna work. Then it's gonna look in public. And so, again, just an FYI thing. Okay, cool. Let me dump some janky CSS in here. So just on the body, just to make sure this works, let me put a background color of red, and then maybe we'll change the font family just for funsies to what else but Georgia. Okay, cool. So I'll save that, and then just to test it out, let me go over here to my app, and if we refresh, there we go. So we have an awesome looking red, disgusting looking background, and the font did change to Georgia. So that's how you can add your own custom JavaScript files, CSS files, and stuff to your app. Any questions about that? Let me stop my screen share. Okay, so let's move on to lab time. So we've covered a lot of stuff today. And so for lab time, you guys are basically just going to build another app from scratch, pretty much walking through everything we've covered today. And you can use the lesson READMEs for reference. I'll push up my code shortly if you want to use that for reference as well. Let me paste this in. Give me 1 second, and I'll paste in our lab time instructions. Okie dokie. So here's what I'd like you guys to do. I'll put you back into breakouts. For lab time, you're going to create a new Express app from scratch that will render your favorite TV shows. Essentially, you're going to walk back through the 2-lesson README files from today and practice what you've learned. So there's 10 steps here. This should pretty much, in broad strokes, walk through everything we covered today. You may want to look at the lesson readmes for details. If I didn't go through all the specifics here, I want you to do a little work yourself. But yeah, you're essentially going to create an app, a TV shows app, and hard code some TV shows and then render those to a web page. You'll put Handlebars in this app and get a bit more practice with that. So I won't belabor you walking through these 10 steps, but again, it's pretty much just walking through what we did today. So I'm around if you have any questions. And I just noticed this, just one thing to, if you look at step 1, it says touch index.js. Go ahead and touch server.js just so we can be consistent. I will update that. And that's something we're trying to do as an instructional team, is just, we're trying to add some consistency there. So in step 1, touch server.js instead of .js. And again, you can name that file whatever you want. We're just trying to make it a little easier on you guys and be consistent. So we're trying to name everything server.js. Okay, folks, we covered a lot of ground today. So thanks for hanging in there. Yeah, just getting some more practice during lab time. So we're around if you need us, and I will open the rooms. And happy hacking. We'll meet back around 5:30.